The next segment of today's show will be us digging deep into the Sunday night football game. If you missed it, the Indianapolis Colts defeated the San Francisco 49ers by a final score of 30-18, and the weather in San Francisco, Santa Clara, California actually was bad. The rain was coming down hard. There are a lot of people from the West Coast that have said usually it doesn't rain that much in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and they were really freaking out just because that is a crazy amount of rain compared to what they usually see. It's not Florida where it rains every day. So San Francisco, the game was played in deep, deep rain. And look, Jimmy Garoppolo ended up getting the start for the 49ers at quarterback in this one. And let's be honest, I just think he was super, super underwhelming. But before we even get into Jimmy Garoppolo and the game that he played, I wanted to talk about Kyle Shanahan, because Kyle Shanahan has been a coach that, even though he was the offensive coordinator of the biggest Super Bowl blown lead in the history of the NFL, 28-3, when he was with the Atlanta Falcons, and he has had that offense rolling with Matt Ryan, I always thought that even though Kyle was the offensive coordinator for that team, overall, that season as a whole really impressed me, despite what happened in the Super Bowl, just because of the work he was able to do with Matt Ryan. We've seen Matt Ryan play football on a consistent basis for the last 12, 13 years now, and he has never looked better than when he was partnered up with Kyle Shanahan. And really, since Kyle Shanahan left the Falcons throughout Dan Quinn's last couple years, and Arthur Smith has done an okay job so far this season. They've won a couple games in a row. Good job there. But the Falcons were at their peak when Kyle Shanahan was running things on offense as the OC, and the head coach, to be honest, is responsible for that Super Bowl loss. He is responsible for all the play calls if he didn't like it. Dan Quinn is a defensive guy. It was his defense that let the Falcons lose that game. But anyway, I always excuse Kyle Shanahan from that. And then also, even though he always had a losing record over the last couple of years, he obviously had that one really good season where he balled out as a head coach. I was putting him in the same category as a guy like Sean McVay, just because I think we all knew at the time, even though Jimmy Garoppolo was getting the job done and winning games, the execution and the scheming of Kyle Shanahan was absolutely phenomenal, and he was able to win games on a consistent basis with Jimmy Garoppolo. But despite that, the 49ers made a move this offseason, and they decided to draft Trey Lance, which was really a sign that going forward, even though in the past Jimmy Garoppolo was able to win a lot of football games for them, they didn't necessarily believe in him. They wanted an upgrade at quarterback, and they drafted Trey Lance. But with Shanahan, I just don't love the way this season has gotten off to in terms of the start, and it's already Halloween. The 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks, who we saw play last night on Monday Night Football, are combined 4-9. And I understand we all predicted and projected the NFC West to be probably the best division in football, but Seattle and San Francisco right now are just two bad football teams. And the 49ers, I think, proved that right now, at least, they're a bad football team based on their performance in a must-win game on Sunday Night Football against the Colts. Because when you look at that division, Arizona right now, they're sitting at 7-0. They're too good. They beat San Francisco straight up. You look at the Los Angeles Rams, they haven't played San Francisco yet, and I totally understand historically, Shanahan's teams have actually played well against McVay, even though I did start off the segment saying putting Shanahan in the same conversation as a head coach like McVay could be a mistake based on the trajectories of their teams right now. And I think that's the main point I wanted to wrap with to start off this first half of the segment, is that Kyle Shanahan, even though he wasn't winning every year, was always a guy who I considered to be a really good head coach, just because he was always able to do more with less. I was actually impressed with last year, at least for the first half of the season. San Francisco had everyone out. Garoppolo was hurt. Kittle was hurt. They had so many injuries, so many COVID issues. And the 49ers, you remember they went into Foxborough and absolutely blew out the New England Patriots? They were impressive for the first half of their season. And I understand this is a 49er team also that has dealt with a lot of adversity. They literally got kicked out of their home county. They usually play in Santa Clara. As we know, they had to play home games at the University of Phoenix Stadium, State Farm Stadium, I believe it's called now. The Arizona Cardinals home field became San Francisco's home field, and the 49ers literally have not won a game at their current stadium in over a year. It's been that long. The last game they won at Levi Stadium was October 4th, 2020 against the Los Angeles Rams on Sunday Night Football. So 49er fans are frustrated that they haven't seen their team win at home, and I think watching this game, that frustration definitely had to accumulate over time because, look, San Francisco, they got off to a 2-0 start, which was impressive, but at the same time, was it really impressive? They beat the Detroit Lions barely. If you remember, they got off to an absolutely huge lead in that game. San Francisco looked like the better team for the first 3.5 quarters, but for some reason, they allowed Jared Goff and the Lions to storm back in that game, and the only reason San Francisco was able to hold on and win was because they stopped Detroit on a 2-point conversion. If Detroit hits that and goes into overtime, to be honest, I wouldn't have loved San Francisco's chances to win that game. They beat the Philadelphia Eagles in a very low-scoring game, but then they lose to the Packers. They lose at home to the Seattle Seahawks. They lose to the Arizona Cardinals with Trey Lance getting the start. And look, let's get into the quarterbacks a little bit. I said on the show a couple weeks ago, I did a segment for the 49ers. I believe it was after the Seahawks game, before that game against Arizona, that I did believe Trey Lance should be the starting quarterback going forward. And this is another real critique I have of Kyle Shanahan. I started off this segment by saying I was a big Kyle Shanahan fan going into this season, and not going to lie, for someone that had really big expectations in the 49ers, keep in mind, San Francisco was a team that was the Vegas favorite to win the NFC West prior to the start of the season, and they've been one of the more disappointing teams in the NFL. They're lucky teams like Kansas City and Miami exist, but San Francisco has been very disappointing. And Kyle Shanahan, even though he decided to draft a quarterback and he signaled that it was going to be time for the 49ers to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo, he played the situation like the 49ers were the Kansas City Chiefs a couple years ago when they drafted Patrick Mahomes. And the reason why I always hated that comparison when it came to the summer and at the early portion of the season was because this situation with San Francisco was nothing really like Kansas City. When Alex Smith was the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, Kansas City was in the playoffs consistently on a year-in, year-out basis. Patrick Mahomes was a project. He came from the Big 12. Let's be honest. Historically, not a lot of good quarterbacks that have came out of the Big 12 were good, and Mahomes was able to start that 17th game and show us something. Trey Lance, I understand he didn't play football in 2020 due to COVID and the fact he played at an FCS school, but Jimmy Garoppolo has really only had one consistent season of winning under center for San Francisco, but also he's only had one real consistent season of staying healthy and staying on the field. And Kyle Shanahan knew that it was time to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo, and he knew that ultimately if the 49ers wanted to win the Super Bowl, Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't going to be the guy, but the quarterback he drafted doesn't seem to be ready, and that's okay. I understand that if you're a rookie, you shouldn't always be able to come into the games right away and be ready. Not everyone is Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow, but at the same time, it's got to be frustrating that the 49ers really did think by drafting a guy like Trey Lance, who was a project, who they apparently knew was going to take some time to develop. Kyle Shanahan really thought that this roster with Jimmy Garoppolo was a possible Super Bowl contender, and he really downplayed the idea of naming a quarterback throughout the portion of the offseason. I do think that could have a little bit to do with this situation as well. If Shanahan would have been able to name a clear, established leader under center who would have been able to lead this offense and who the receivers and the offensive line would be able to get to used to being worked with, that would have been huge for the San Francisco 49er team, and I think in a way that could have cost them. Brandon Nyuk, this is a guy who last year showed some really good flashes for the San Francisco 49ers. He's nowhere to be found. And apparently, Kyle Shanahan really likes him, he said, but he needs to start to learn to grind. He needs to, be better on the field. He needs to be smarter. He needs to learn the playbook, stuff like that. He is clearly in the doghouse. But then I watch guys like Mohamed Sanu. I watch a guy who isn't really a playmaker over there getting the job done, especially when you compare him to Ayuk. I also look at Trent Sherfield, like fine players, but you drafted Brandon Ayuk in the first round for a reason. George Kittle is hurt. Raheem Mostert is hurt. Elijah Mitchell has been a really nice story at running back, but really, Deebo Samuel and Mitchell were the only threats on offense for the 49ers. And I'll give credit to the Colts. Carson Wentz at quarterback, a guy who over the last couple of years has really been under a lot of scrutiny, and it was clear it was best for both sides for him to move on from the Philadelphia Eagles. I really liked that he was going to be teaming up with Frank Reich, a coach that was with him during Wentz's best moments before his ACL injury, the year the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl in 2017. Carson Wentz, in poor weather on the road, was able to make more plays than Jimmy Garoppolo. Without T.Y. Hilton in the lineup, he and Michael Pittman were really able to connect, and the Colts defense was able to make enough plays. They were able to force turnovers with Jimmy G, and they were able to secure the victory for Indianapolis. If I was a 49er fan, I really would not be happy at all. This was a frustrating game, and I would just be frustrated that even though your team knew that it would be best to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo as their starting quarterback, they still decided to bring and build a team that many people, including themselves, thought was good enough to win a Super Bowl championship. And clearly, with Jimmy G under center in this NFC West, it is not good enough to get the job done. I really did think that Sunday night could have been a must-win game for the San Francisco 49ers, considering the fact that they are now about 4 games behind the Los Angeles Rams, 5 games behind the Arizona Cardinals, and for the first time, I'm really starting to lose some faith in Kyle Shanahan. The start to this season from him has not been good at all, and we always compare him and Sean McVay and as two of the best young coaches in the NFL and two guys that are really going to be next in terms of the future great coaches in this league. Right now, Sean McVay has his legacy going in one direction, and Kyle Shanahan, based on recent events, has his legacy going in another. I'm disappointed with the 49ers. That was a brutal effort Sunday Night Football against the Colts.